Welcome to another episode of my Wake Up Call. This is the podcast where I get to know people a little bit, or sometimes better than a little bit. And I want to share them with you, our listeners. And it seems like some of these are showing up on YouTube, so with our viewers. And I'm happy to say that after 550 episodes, I'm close to batting 100% with people who are up to all good. And they're waging a valiant battle against too many of the people who are up to no good. And I've got one of those again today. She comes back, and I think I can speak for her that both of us can hardly wait to find out what we talk about. So you may actually know of her. Amy Morin.
Morin, yep.
I got it right. I've been mispronouncing things lately. She's a psychotherapist. She's an international best-selling author of The 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. She gave one of the most popular TEDx talks of all time with over 23 million views. And she's the host of a top mental health podcast called Mentally Stronger with therapist Amy Morin. Her newest book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Couples Don't Do, is out and sure to be a bestseller. And actually, it's about to be out, and which means I got to speed up getting this podcast up. And you can, and if you pre-order it, you can get a month of therapy at BetterHelp for free. And you can also go to amymorinlcsw.com/couples for details. So I think I just cornered myself. We'll get this one up soon. So Amy, good to have you back. And one of the things we were talking about before this interview is Amy has this ability to focus where people are coming from. And a lot of people who are struggling, who are in pain as individuals or in relationships, they actually want immediately doable, practical tactics that they can do to make their lives better. Something I'll share with you, because people will say, well, these are don't do books, Mark. You know, what does that mean? I think people are kind of curious more about the don't do's to see if they see themselves in it. And I have a book called Just Listen, which has done pretty well around the world, but it's a soft title, listening. But one of the ways I get their attention is I say, think of someone who really cares about you, and in your mind's eye, ask them, what would be the positive effect on our relationship and other people's respect for me if I became a better listener? Small, medium, large. And they say, a medium. But here's my channeling my inner Amy. I'd say to them, ask them what has already been the negative effect on your relationship with them and other people's regard for you when you have been at your absolute worst as a listener. When you cut people off, when you talk down to them, when you were sarcastic. And it immediately grabs their attention because they get flashbacks. And they're like a deer in the headlights. It's the negative effect has been pretty large. You know? So anyway, that's enough talking, because my listeners will say, would you let Amy on the show already? So welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's always good to be on your show.
And I guess what I would ask you is, as you said, you know, you were this kind of small town therapist in Maine, and then this has taken off. What I'd be curious is how you came to be able to see the benefit of kind of the both the number 13 and the don't do. what really healthy people don't do, what strong people don't do, what strong couples don't do. How did you happen to come across that as opposed to here's what you should do if you're those people?
Well, it really came from my own story. As a therapist, I was told, like, build on people's strengths. When they come into your office and you notice them doing something well, tell them to keep doing that. So if somebody said, I'm eating vegetables, like, yeah, keep eating vegetables. But it was when I went through my own experiences with pain, I thought the last thing I really want now is a lengthy to-do list. I lost my mom when I was 23. I
Mm.
lost my husband when I was 26. I lost a former foster child, and I lost my father-in-law, all in about a 10-year span. And when I was really suffering with extreme emotional pain and I was in distress, the last thing I wanted was somebody to be like, Amy, you did a good job today. Keep up the good work. It just didn't feel like that was enough. And I thought, and I also didn't want a list of 25 things I should do today. But if I just looked at a list of what not to do, I thought, well, I can handle this when I'm at my worst. Like, I didn't want to make my life horrible by doing things that backfire, or I don't want to do things that are counterproductive. And the only way I could really make it make sense to me was if I went to the gym and my trainer said, run on the treadmill, great, I'd do that if I really wanted to get in shape. But if they didn't tell me that eating junk food was like counterintuitive, I was going to be really upset. So I thought, it's easier to just cut out the extra jelly donut than it is to spend another hour on the treadmill. And maybe mental health is the same. Building mental strength could be the exact same thing. Sometimes it's easier to cut out our worst habit. Just like you said, you could be a great listener 90% of the time, but if the other 10% you're condescending and rude, it really doesn't matter that you listen the other 90% of the time. The takeaway from that person is going to be that sometimes you're mean or you're rude or you don't listen. So in my own life, I wanted to know, how do I make sure that I just don't do these things? And as a therapist, I really just observed people. You know what that's like. You get to know what works and what doesn't by watching people, by listening to them, and by learning from them. And I had learned that people who didn't do certain things tended to get better faster. And then on one of my worst days, I wrote down the list of all the things that I had learned over the years as a therapist. And it just so happened that I ended up with 13. I never intended to make the list public. I think having the number 13 certainly helped it go viral because it introduced a little extra mystery into it. But that wasn't my intention to begin with. It was really a letter to myself on one of my worst days to say, okay, Amy, just don't do these things today and you'll get through it.
I'm trying to. I coach people now, and I coach some founders of companies, and one of the things I've been coaching them on is often when they pitch to an investor, I said, you need to toggle between talking to and with them instead of over and at them. Because you talk over and at. And what happens is you take away their freedom to choose to engage or give you their money because you're telling them they have to. And they're smiling politely saying, no way you get my money. And you're driving them away. And when they smile early on, it's not a yes. They're being polite, but they're done with you. And it just so clicked for them to not talk over or at people. So I can see how that gets more traction, than saying these are the things you should do, because as soon as they see the negative effects of the things they should stop, it seems to grab them more.
It does, because most people already have certain good habits. You might practice gratitude. You might go to bed early. You brush your teeth twice a day. But hearing another list of here's 55 more things you should do seems overwhelming. So sometimes it's much easier to think, all right, as long as I don't do a couple things, then okay. And I think people do read it as like a checklist of how am I doing with these 13 things? How often do I do them? And which things are the biggest struggle for me? And it feels more doable sometimes to then say, all right, I'm just going to cut out these 2 extra things rather than I'm going to add more stuff to my life.
Ooh, I love what you just said. Maybe I'm going to cut out these 2 things rather than adding things, because it sounds like what you're saying is people are already overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and and cutting out something from the overwhelm, seems somewhat easier than adding something.
It does. And sometimes I think we don't realize that adding something in addition to something else doesn't make it a good choice. If I sit down and eat an entire cake, eating a salad alongside the cake doesn't make the cake any healthier. It's still a bad choice. So when you say, all right, we'll just cut out eating an extra helping of ice cream or stop eating so many things in your life that are creating problems for you, cut down on the sugar, sometimes it's easier to do that, and then you just don't feel like you're adding in an apple plus an entire bowl of ice cream. Let's just make sure that we acknowledge, all right, I'm going to eat a reasonable portion. Same for so many other habits in our lives. If you just make sure that you aren't doing those counterproductive bad things, we become much more effective. I felt like, I was in a hamster wheel for a while when I'm going through tough times, and no matter how many good things I would do, I just never felt like I was really making progress. So I thought, maybe you just need to get rid of the stuff that's holding you back, and suddenly the things you do are effective.
So can you give some examples from your early insight about that, and maybe some of your earliest experience of cutting out things and thinking, this is easier than just adding the positive, adding the should do's.
Yeah. One thing, a big one, was feeling sorry for myself. So again, I was 23 when my mom died, 26 when my husband died, but it was the anniversary, the 3-year anniversary of my mother's death, which made it feel like it was especially cruel. Like, how could this possibly be that on this exact day in February that this would happen? And so I went through a lot of those questions of like, why me and poor me, and realizing, no, it's okay to be sad, but like exaggerating how bad my life wasn't going to do me or anybody else any good. And if I really like stayed stuck in a place of self-pity, like I would never be able to make my life okay again. So I really had to separate self-pity from sadness and make sure that I allowed myself to be sad and to go through the painful experience of grief so I could heal. But counting up how many horrible things happened to me and dwelling on those certainly didn't do me any good. So I think giving up self-pity was a big one. Which is why it's first on my list. And the second one on my list was another big one, which was giving away my power. I was quick for a while to be like, you know, somebody else ruined my day because they said something perhaps that was meant to be kind, but it came out as not the kindest thing to hear at that moment. Or when I wanted to blame my circumstances on ruining my life, like none of that was helpful. It was really about saying, no, let's change my language, take back my power, and say, it's a choice. Yes, maybe somebody said something and it wasn't the kindest thing in the world, but I don't have to let it ruin my whole day. And just making that switch and changing the language in my head made a huge difference.
So were there some enough already moments, like enough already with the self-pity, enough already with it's just taking me down, a dark hole that it just makes it harder to get out of?
Absolutely. And I thought if I stay here, like it might be 10 years from now, I'm still going to be sitting in this place thinking, gosh, that's terrible, horrible, and awful. And it was a incredibly bad decade of my life, but I didn't want to stay stuck there. So I had those moments of like, okay, enough already. How do I get up and do something? How do I make sure that I'm not just rehashing and ruminating everything bad that happened? How do I make sure that I'm healing and not just intensifying my pain?
That makes so much sense. There's a technique, and I'm trying to remember the psychologist who shared it with me, and I can't. So if you ever listen to this, say I'm the person who told you this, Mark. And he had this technique where he said you need to get people to separate their present and future from the past. So he came up with this thing called up until now. Like, up until now, I have felt sorry for myself when this happens. Up until now, I played the victim role. Up until now, uh, and I have found it really helpful, when I can feel that tendency to get drawn into the negative, hamster wheel and that kind of thing.
I like that because sometimes we put a label on ourselves. Like I'm the kind of person who always feels sorry for myself. But when you become that person or, I have a victim mindset, you're going to keep doing it in the future. So I like that, flipping the switch and saying up until now, because you don't have to continue to be that person.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us how you went into the 13 things mentally strong couples don't do. Is it that you had covered so many other areas and you thought you'd throw that into the mix? How is it you decided to go in that direction?
So usually I write the next book based on what my readers are asking for. When they said, how do we teach kids how to be mentally strong? I came out with a parenting book and then a kid's book. So for this one, I was hearing from a lot of people who were like, yeah, but my partner, like I could be stronger if only my partner didn't do X, Y, or Z. Or I'd like to be the kind of person who is more physically fit, but my partner won't go to the gym with me. Or, my partner drinks too much and it's really stressful on me. So I'm not able to build mental strength. So I really wanted to create a book that says, yeah, in a perfect world, it would be great if both people wanted to build mental strength and we were building it together. And there are some of those couples out there where both people are certainly going to be invested on saying, how do I work on myself? But I also wanted people to know, what do you do when your partner doesn't change or your partner's not invested or they have some habits that maybe are annoying you or stressing you out? How can you be strong anyway? And I know you know this better than a lot of people that we do have an impact on the people around us. And so if you're not careful, your partner can have a negative impact on you. But the reverse is also true. If you want your partner to change, you can create positive change in your own life and have an influence on them as well.
So give some specific examples because my listeners are like a lot of your patients, my former patients. They want to be able to see themselves in some examples.
Yeah. So there's a chapter in the book about not trying to fix your partner. And this is a common one. And I give the example in a book of a woman who is in a marriage where her husband drinks too much. And this is a common one where you see somebody who takes it upon themselves to do everything. And she was desperate to, dump out the alcohol down the drain, do everything she could to yell at him, to make him stop drinking. And it was really about her own self-awareness of, I can't make him stop. Because we even brainstormed, like, what are all the options? If you really want him to change his behavior, what could you do? And she came up with some wild options. She could lock him in a room without access to alcohol. There were some things she could certainly try, but they weren't going to work in the long term. But she was at that point of desperation where she felt like it's my duty as a good partner to save him from himself, essentially. And so we worked on figuring out, how do you make sure that you perhaps influence his positive choices? You're happy when he comes home as opposed to yelling at him when he walks through the door, or you help motivate him to want to change, or you could have conversations about, is he happy with his drinking? Does he want to make changes, as opposed to lecturing and yelling at him? And really, when she made her own changes, not only did it reduce her stress, but it also made some changes in the relationship that she felt like she could live with. But that's one of the most common things that I've seen in therapy, and I suspect you've seen it in plenty of people, where they're just so worried about their partner that they find it hard to function and they really want to fix it, or they see somebody's potential and they really want them to live up to that potential, even if their partner isn't necessarily invested in changing.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Uh, what do you think about? There's an expression I have called the wince confrontation, and the wince confrontation, it doesn't come from anger, it comes from pain. It really pains me to have to tell you this, and then if you can kind of bare your neck, you have skin in the game. So something I know that seems to have some impact is when, as a couple, when you can say to the other person, I'm scared because what I'm seeing you do and what I'm seeing you not do, every time it happens, I lose respect for you. And you have no idea how painful it is to not respect you because I love you. But when you do these things that cause me to lose respect for you, it just tears me up. It just hurts too much. And, and that seemed to be sort of an effective way of, baring your neck instead of your teeth.
I like that a lot because that hits differently than if you say, you shouldn't do that. That's bad for you, as opposed to, this is my experience. You can't really argue that that's not my experience because that's actually how I feel. And so it does hit differently. And I can imagine it doesn't lead to nearly as many defensive replies from people as opposed to if you said, you shouldn't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think part of it is that I'm going to have I do a radio show in the UK. There's a channel called UK Health Radio. And we have a show called Hurt Less, Live More. And the idea behind it is we believe that a lot of people run away from hurt and fear into destructive behaviors. And if we can get people talking about the hurt in their life, and get them sharing it and get them not get them, but it causes them to be vulnerable. And when they're sharing the story about what still hurts that you can't shake, and when they get vulnerable, listeners seem to be drawn to that. And so that's our view, is that if you can, if instead of adding positive stuff, you can just be open about, so what hurts so much that you can't take it? And if you can get people feeling it and sharing it, without running away from it, it dissipates.
I like that a lot because how often do we see people that tend to do all of these self-destructive things? I mean, your book, Get Out of Your Own Way.
Mm-hmm.
Great example of that how we sabotage ourselves, how we do so many things that get in our own way. We don't even realize what it is. And it's kind of like the story about the tiger with a thorn in his paw, and he doesn't want anybody to take the thorn out because he thinks that's where the pain's going to be. So he limps around with it for so long until finally lets somebody take it out and realizes taking it out didn't hurt. And once you get it out, your life gets better. But until you trust that you can let somebody help you deal with that pain, I think we do. We suffer so much more than we need to.
And why do you think it is that we don't open up? Why do you think it is that we don't allow someone to take the thorn out?
I think we always like to think we know better than somebody else does. So we think, no, I know what I need and I don't need to address that. Or if I let you do something to me, it's going to get worse. So we just really want to be independent. And I think we don't trust that other people can sometimes see it from a different angle than we can.
Yeah, I want to share something, because there's a conversation. Is this okay that we're having this conversation as opposed?
Absolutely.
So people on my podcast and probably now publicly know I'm kind of going through a health issue, and I've lived. This was probably one of my self-defeating behaviors. Is I would rarely let anyone not only help me, I would rarely let anyone care about me, because my role was to be the person who helped. My role was to be the person who cared. And if I was having a conversation with someone and they'd say, "How are you doing?" I'd say, "Oh, I'm fine. What are you up to? Yeah, what would you like to be? Would you like to be playing at a bigger game, Amy?" And
Right.
And then 3 months ago, someone apparently who cares about me, said, "How you doing?" And instead of saying I'm fine, I said, "Well, I'm dealing with some issues." And then, he said, "What's that about?" And then I shared something about my health issue. And as I shared it with him, I got emotional and I started to cry. Now, I didn't cry in a boo-hoo, helpless way. That was important. It just came out. And then I got embarrassed. I apologized. And I said, "I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I don't want to burden you." And I don't know if you can understand the amazing responses I have now gotten from a number of people. One person said, "It's not a burden, it's a gift." And one man said, I said, "How is it a gift?" He said, "This is the most emotionally intimate conversation I've ever had in my life."
Mm.
Because I was just open. I was no agenda. It just came out. And then another person said, "I envy you." What? And he said, "No, I don't want your illness." He said, "But the fact that you feel safe with me to just be the way you are, and what you see is being emotional is," he said, "I see you as feeling safe and I see you as feeling free. And I've never felt that way."
Wow.
And then I'm accumulating my own version of the 700 Club, because some of these people are dyed in the wool transactional. And if I chased after them with a business idea, they would ghost me. And the majority of them have said 24/7. What does that mean? You can call me 24/7. And I'm trying to figure it out. And I still haven't figured it out, but I think what it is that just the vulnerability, unvarnished, no agenda, no helplessness. It was just like a wake up call for them. So I'm so sorry for sharing that with you. That'd probably better fit if you have me on your show. But
Which I will, but you know what really strikes me about that as you're talking about it? I'm just envisioning the people that you used to work with who were suicidal, who used to share like the most vulnerable thoughts that they had at the worst moments of their lives, and that you were on the receiving end of that. And yet then how difficult it is to now be the person who is able to cry in front of somebody else, and that it's still difficult sometimes, right?
no, yeah, absolutely, and it is freeing. It's a friend of mine gave me another insight that I'm just trying to, and I think you'll be able to help explain it to me. And it's about something we've kind of talked about. She said, when you can identify a feeling, whatever it is, anger, fear, anxiety, when you can identify it and then feel it as purely as you can feel it, it dissipates in 90 seconds. And I think she was right. I think she was, because what'll happen is when that feeling came out, or whatever it was, the vulnerability, the boo-hoo didn't last more than 90 seconds. And I think I did feel free. And, but I thought that was a fascinating observation. Does that make any sense to you?
It does, because I think a lot of our energy sometimes goes toward fighting it, right? Or we don't really acknowledge it. You just feel that like spike in anxiety and you reach for your phone, or you feel a little lonely, so you immediately call somebody or walk out the door instead of just saying, "How am I feeling right now?" And we know the research is there, just putting a name to an emotion reduces the intensity of it. But there's so much chatter about emotional intelligence and trying to figure out how other people are feeling. But I think we're really far from that. It's tough to just say, yeah, what emotion do I feel? In fact, I'll work with CEOs sometimes, and these are really smart people. And I'll say, list as many feeling words as you can in 30 seconds. And they get out their pen and their paper and they're trying to take notes as fast as they can to come up with as many feeling words. And they get to about 5. And once you get beyond the basics, it's really tough because we don't talk about emotions. We don't really spend any time acknowledging them, let alone putting a name to them. So I think it's so powerful sometimes to just say, yeah, how do I feel? And there are the emotions we don't like about ourselves. When you're jealous, it doesn't feel good to admit that. Or when we're angry and hurt about something, we don't want to acknowledge that hurt our feelings. It's easier to think, well, that person is rude, rather than perhaps what they said is an accurate statement about what I just did. So that's a powerful thing to say, just sit with how you feel sometimes.
Yes. Another technique I learned, a friend of mine was the COO of the Marines in the 90s. He was the first CEO of the U.S. Intrepid aircraft carrier in the Hudson. And I was worked with him on a transition program for returning Marines. And he taught me this because what they valued most from the program was the hour and a half one-on-one time they had with General Marty Steele. And I said, Marty, what'd you talk to him about? And he said, well, I used the 5 reallys. And I said, well, what was that? So we'd start out, how are you doing, Marine? Well, it's a little bit different being in a war zone than being home. And he would say, well, I understand it's really different, but what's really going on? Well, I don't think my family understands me. I don't think anyone understands, if they haven't been in a war. Well, I understand that too, but what's really going on? And he said, when I got to the 5th wheelie, some of them would look at me like a deer in the headlights, and they'd say, I saw and did horrible things, sir. And when I close my eyes, I see them more clearly, so I don't close my eyes much. And then he would give them a direct order saying, look, if you've been in a war zone as a Marine, we've all seen and done awful things. We didn't do it intentionally, but we did them. And I'm giving you a direct order to put that aside because all of us have earned the right to a life. And he got letters from spouses saying, you saved my spouse's life. But I thought that was also a fascinating way to get through to people. So I understand you're frustrated by the situation, Mr. or Ms. CEO, but what's really going on? And I have found it really powerful because you get to that. Now, sometimes they may get angry. Well, I told you. No, I know you told me, but what's really going on? And sometimes they just crack open, and then the emotion comes out, and they feel released. So, can you track with that kind of?
Yeah, I use that exercise often for individuals to ask themselves that question, which is essentially the same, but like, what would that mean? So somebody might say, I have to work really, really late because I have so many projects to do. Well, if you didn't work really late, what would that mean? It would mean I'm not a very good employee. Okay, well, what would that mean if you weren't a good employee? It would mean that I'm not a worthwhile person because I couldn't provide for my family. Well, like, what would that mean? Well, it would mean my partner shouldn't have got together with me in the first place because I'm not good enough. I don't add enough value. And really just asking yourself that question, what would that mean to me when we're trying to push ourselves to do things, or when we're in these situations that we find impossible? Like, well, what if you didn't do that? What would that mean? And asking yourself that question a couple of times really helps figure out like what's going on underneath. And there's usually a fear of not being good enough, or a fear that somehow you don't belong. But I like that question too, where you just ask other people like, yeah, what does that really mean? And then they uncover it for themselves in the conversation, because we don't walk up to people saying, listen to what's really going on in my life. We present a problem of, hey, I just had this phone call and it didn't go well and I'm struggling. Well, what's really going on? Well, here's the real story of why that phone call was so upsetting. So I love that idea.
Well, I'm ambivalent because I may like yours better. What does that really mean? I think they're similar, and they both get at the self-discovery, as opposed to, you prematurely giving unsolicited advice or solutions that, when it'd be better if they self-discovered.
Exactly, because so often we know that's what happens in conversations. We offer feedback based on what we think that they want. Like, do you want me to fix the problem? Here you go. Here's a solution. But sometimes that's not even really what's going on with the person. We don't know the underlying emotions or the backstory of why they're struggling with something. And as you know, people often don't want our solutions when we offer them anyway. And then we get frustrated because they don't take our advice. But really, that's not what they wanted anyway.
So let me ask you something that I sometimes ask people who seem perfect. She's going, okay, what's this? There've been some people who I've had on the show, and they seem to have it figured out. And I know that sometimes when they speak to audiences will be really impressed. but people in the audience will say, I'm just a schmo, I'm just a schmo or trying to get through life. You've got it all figured out. So when I've asked some of these people, where could you get even better? Some of them just started laughing. They would say, oh, my mind is a hot mess. I mean, I think I throw myself into figuring things out, and they loved it. So like an area I could get even better, although since, the situation I've been in has helped, I still can take things personally that really aren't meant personally. And I need to stop myself because sometimes the other person will be in a rush and they didn't mean it personally. They just wanted to get it out before they had to go on to their next task. And I'm taking it personally. So I often have to say, did they mean it personally? Were they judging you or were they just in a rush? And, but that's something I could still get a lot better on. What's something you could get better at?
Oh gosh, there's definitely plenty of things I could get better at. I think one thing I would get better at would be I have an amazing ability sometimes to not invest the energy into holding a real conversation in the moment. So when somebody says, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's an okay idea," when really I'm thinking it's not a good idea because I'm in a hurry. Instead of saying, "Hey, I don't have time to really have an in-depth conversation about that right now," I'll just kind of nod and smile. And then down the road, I'm like, actually, I don't like that idea. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me to begin with? Well, I was busy that day when you first asked me. So I think that sometimes speaking up earlier on and saying, either I would love to have this conversation, but not right this second, or I have some concerns about it. Let's discuss it and actually diving in rather than just nodding and smiling early on.
Yeah. So have you made a commitment to do a better job, or you're just saying, okay, look, I'm not perfect, this is one of the 13 things that mentally strong me does that isn't perfect. Cut yourself some slack, Amy.
It's definitely something I've worked on to be able to say, hey, let's have a conversation about that right now, to have it up front. And it goes back to, I was a really shy kid as a child, so I spent my childhood nodding and smiling and never really speaking up. And now as an adult, I have to remind myself sometimes, no, you should speak up now rather than later.
Talk about that, because I am a painful introvert still. And when I used to give presentations, sometimes I would start out by saying, I have to do a little psychological housekeeping here. I'm a painful introvert. I'm shy. I'm not just someone who's super gregarious. And I have to put that aside because I don't want you to confuse my shyness with my lacking confidence in what I'm going to share with you, which I hope will be helpful. But I have to put it aside because it's still there. And I've often thought it was manipulative, and part of it was because the audience would say, oh, he's just like us. He's not perfect. He's not such and such. And this could be a meme. I'm not going to do anything with it. But if so, I'd like to be a founding member of the Dread Going But Glad I Went Club.
I like that.
I don't know if you can relate to it, but
Yep.
it still operates in me. And anyway, so if you're listening in, you want to run with something, it's not taken, start a Dread Going But Glad I Went Club. People will come out of the woodwork. So go run with it. I'm not going to do that. And
I think you'll have a lot of members if anybody starts that.
yeah, don't you think so? I mean,
I
it's,
do.
I mean, it's, and it's interesting. Here's something else that I could get better at. And maybe this is why I'm kind of at peace with my situation. When I wake up in the morning, I don't jump out of bed with, oh, I can't wait to just start the day. In fact, when I wake up and my eyes open, uh, And I don't do this anymore because sometimes I'd say, oh, if I could just die now.
Yeah.
And here's what I say. I say, just get vertical and in the shower. And it's crazy because when I get vertical and I'm in the shower, I don't even recognize the person who is laying in bed like a beached whale. So that's part of the dread going. But once I get going, yeah, glad I did. So
I
can you?
like that though. One small step at a time, right? And I think people will be relieved to know that you don't leap out of bed like I just love life all day every day, because I think sometimes people have that concern that other people are just so gung ho about life and they wake up happy, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you. No, it's okay. Because I see so many people that get up at 4 in the morning and brag about it and how their day is half over by the time they eat lunch. Not everybody was meant to be like that, and that's okay. I'm certainly not either.
So how do you? So if you're if you can recognize some similar things, so how do you push through? I mean, do you just is it part of the routine and you just kind of accept that this is who I am, Amy, and just get going? You'll pick up momentum. You're actually looking forward to the day. Lots of things that you have scheduled that are going to put a smile on your face. How do you break through that?
I guess when I first wake up in the morning, yeah, I try to look for something to look forward to in the day. So even though I know maybe it's not until 6 o'clock that I'm gonna go do something fun, just having something to look forward to is certainly something that gets me up and gets me going. And I live on a sailboat, and so life's a little bit different on a sailboat. So it's about getting up and getting outside. So I don't take a shower when I first roll out of bed. I usually go outside, and it's 85 degrees on any given day in South Florida. So 2 seconds of being outside certainly wakes me up. So it's a reminder of you'll feel better when you get there, and get up and push yourself to get there. And coffee is the other thing that really gets me out of bed too. It's a great motivator.
So I'm channeling my listeners, and they're saying, "Get her to talk about living on a boat for crying out loud." Well, what's that about?
So my current husband, I'm remarried. He always wanted to live on a boat since he was 4. His bedroom was decorated in a sailboat theme. And when we got together, he said, I'd really like to live on a boat someday. And I thought that's interesting, but I didn't even really know people lived on boats. But we said, yeah, someday we should do that. And then we really realized that you probably shouldn't put things off until someday. If there was anything I had learned in my life, it was you don't really know what's promised. And so we just said, let's do it, like, as a challenge. And when I was working as a full-time therapist in Maine, obviously it wasn't an option. But once I had a book deal and I could write books, I thought, oh, I guess we could make it happen if we wanted to. So we did it not knowing how long it would last, thinking maybe it would be like a 6-month adventure. But it's been 7 years now, and I'm still on a boat.
Wow. Wow. Do you have Dramamine next to the Splenda for guests?
Well, people will be like, I could never do that. I get seasick. Well, guess what? I would be really seasick too. We don't go out on really rough days. I'm usually at a dock so I can have high speed internet. And we have the relief band bracelets that can make sure you don't get seasick, unlike with Dramamine that makes you super tired. So yeah, there's some challenges to living on a boat too. It's not all fun and games all the time, but it's fun too.
If you're in South Florida, what about all the crazy weather? How did that affect you?
When there's a hurricane, I'm usually one of the first people to evacuate. Will not stay on a boat in a hurricane. I've stayed on a tropical storm before, and that gets a little squirrely, but the boat, we survived Irma. I wasn't on the boat when it happened, which was in 2017, and it was a category 4-ish hurricane that hit. The boat was okay. So the boat will tolerate more than I will, but I'll be one of the first people to evacuate if it looks like a hurricane's coming our way.
Yeah. How big is the boat?
So it's 53 feet.
Hmm.
So it's 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, obviously really small bedrooms and small bathrooms and small spaces. But but big enough. I realized I don't need a lot of stuff in life to be happy. I moved here basically with a laptop and a couple items of clothing, and I don't really need a lot more than that.
So you're in your boat right now.
I am, yes.
Oh, that changes the whole conversation for me. I'm appreciating the wood, which must have all kinds of varnish on it, so the salt doesn't eat through it. And
Correct. Yep.
wow, wow. Well, that's fascinating. So what I'd like to do, which I sometimes do when people have new books, is I know my listeners and I know readers are often looking for. I never would have thought of that nuggets, and I could do that today. So can you whet our appetite with a couple of those that are counterintuitive and will cause people to rush to the in-port bookstores?
So one would be to assume goodwill from your partner. We know that as time goes on, we underestimate how many good things our partner does, and we exaggerate their flaws. We're quick to notice they didn't pick up their shoes, but we forget that they brought home groceries when they came home from work. And so one of the things that we can do is just, first of all, just point out, really recognize, take a step back and say, what did they do that was good today? And then assume that they had good intentions. When people are dating, if your partner is 5 minutes late for dinner and you're meeting at a restaurant, we're really quick to say it must have been traffic. But once we've been married for 20 years and somebody's 5 minutes late, people tend to think they don't care about me. So one thing is just assume goodwill, notice the good in them, assume goodwill. And another quick strategy is to have conversations about secrets versus privacy. Like it's
Mm.
okay to maybe have your phone and you don't have to give out your password because you consider that to be private. But what's a secret? Maybe how much you spent on some item that you just bought shouldn't necessarily be a secret from your partner. We should be having those discussions more often of what's my expectation about what you would keep private versus what's a secret. And especially with social media these days, if your ex reaches out to you on social media, should you share that? What's your expectation of what your partner would do? So if we just have more conversations about what's my expectations about privacy and secrecy, and I'm going to assume goodwill, it would go a long way toward healing a lot of relationships.
These are wonderful. And I don't have to have any curiosity, insight, or understanding to apply those. I can see why your books do so well.
Well, thank you.
Um, there's something I've learned lately in life. Uh, it's similar to the assume goodwill. I learned this. I have 4 grandchildren, 5 and under, and I get to see them every day. I'm a little bit isolated from them, but I get to see them, and often my family will kind of ignore me, not include me. You know, my wife and my daughters are, talking about various details, and my grandchildren will look up because no one's talking to me and I'm not saying anything, and I don't want to intrude. They're playing. Why do I need to add questions when they're playing? And so something I discovered, which I wish I knew when I was younger, when my children were younger, I go there to bathe my grandchildren in utter delight.
Mm.
So when they do look up at me, I look into their eyes with a look that says, I adore you so much it hurts. And they take a double take, like because their mom and dad love them, but they're busy, checking the boxes, feed them, change them, get everything ready, and they love them. And utter delight means pushing everything out of your mind and just experiencing utter delight and having other people see it. And a secret I have for my wife is I'm bathing her in utter delight.
I love that. If we think that somebody looks at us like that, oh, it makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I got to tell you, when we exchanged emails today and you said you were looking forward to seeing me, and I felt exactly the same way. Um, Maybe the full bath didn't come across, but when I saw you, in the video before we started the talk, uh, I felt utter delight just in seeing you again.
Oh, thank you. Well, and I think that that shines through which is probably, another reason why people talk to you, because you do have an amazing ability to give people your full attention and you show your utter delight.
Well, I think the world is hungry for, I've been trying to encourage people to use it all kinds of places, like when a waiter or waitress waits on you and they do a good job and they look at you and they say, "Is there anything else?" You read their name tag and say, "Yeah, Julie. Oh, no, you're not in any trouble." And you look in their eyes and you say, "Julie, yeah. Hey, thank you." And what will happen is they'll look at you like, okay. And sometimes when they leave the table, they'll be like that. What the heck was that?
Right.
But I think it's a good. What the heck was that? So we can all do a better job of bathing each other in utter delight.
I think so as well. What a big difference that little thing could make in the world.
Absolutely. So I'm not that delighted to our coming to an end, and we're going to put some excerpts up because you gave some great nuggets. We do something called 90-second mentor on LinkedIn where we grab little nuggets, and you gave a couple of great examples. So those will go up on that probably in a while. And where can people find you, find the book, find out more about you, and want more of you? Because they're going to want more of you.
Well, thank you. My website is Amy Morin, LCSW.com. And there's information about how to pre-order the couples book and get our bonus for a free month of therapy on BetterHelp. And my podcast is called Mentally Stronger with therapist Amy Morin.
Well, there you have it. And to our listeners, yeah, check out All Things Amy. And not to be confused with some politicians up there in Washington. There's a few Amy's up there, but this is Amy Morin, and check out all of her books because Amy and I believe in you. We believe that you're mentally strong, and there's probably some things that you're doing that you don't have to. So make sure you give that a shot. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you for having me.